The command came draped in velvet words and sealed with the Queen's crest, but it wasn't Her Majesty's hand that signed it. By the authority of the Crown, the parchment read, the ceremonial order of the Royal Cavalry shall henceforth be amended at Her Majesty's discretion. It was signed Camilla Regina Consortis. The ink was still wet when Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Thompson, standing in full dress uniform beneath the cold marble light of Windsor's council chamber, laid the paper back onto the table. His jaw tightened. The silence around him was almost sacred. He knew that signature was not the Queen's will, not the Queen whose voice still echoed in the hearts of her soldiers. It was a command forged in ambition, not in duty. I cannot comply, Your Majesty, he said evenly, the words carrying like steel in the still air. This order violates Her late Majesty's ceremonial code. The cavalry bows only to the Crown, not to the Crown's consort. Across from him, Queen Camilla's painted smile stiffened. Around them, aides froze mid-breath. The refusal of a royal command was unheard of, yet Jonathan did not waver. At that moment, it wasn't a rebellion, it was a remembrance, because behind his eyes still lived the image of Queen Elizabeth II, standing beneath rain at Trooping the Color, whispering to him, Jonathan, remember, honor is the spine of the monarchy. Without it, crowns are hollow things, and now, the hollow thing was standing before him, cloaked in silk and authority she had not earned. Camilla leaned forward, voice sharp. You misunderstand. I speak for the monarchy. Jonathan's reply came cold, measured. With respect, ma'am, you speak from it, not for it. The words landed like a slap. Within hours, the palace corridors buzzed with whispers. The Queen Consort challenged. The guard refused. The press didn't know yet, but the soldiers did. In barracks across London, men who had served under Elizabeth lifted their heads in quiet pride. For them, Thompson's defiance wasn't mutiny. It was loyalty in its purest form. Camilla's aides moved quickly, drafting statements, spinning control. An administrative misunderstanding, they called it. But the damage was already done. One aide who witnessed the confrontation described it later as a moment when the spirit of the late Queen walked the room. Because Jonathan Thompson had done what few dared. He had said no not to a woman, but to a corruption of meaning. That night, Camilla summoned him privately to her study, the firelight flickering against gilded portraits. She poured herself a drink before speaking. You've humiliated me, she said softly. Do you understand what that means? I understand, Jonathan replied, standing at attention. But the oath I swore was not to a throne of flesh. It was to the Crown as it was, and to what it stood for. Her Majesty made that clear. Camilla's eyes narrowed. Her Majesty is dead. Jonathan met her gaze, unflinching. Not in Windsor, not in the hearts of those who still serve. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a brittle laugh, she dismissed him. You're an antique, Colonel. The world belongs to the ones who adapt. But as he walked from the room, the Queen Consort's words hung behind him like a warning, or perhaps an admission. Outside, the night air was cold, the courtyard silent, except for the stamping of horses in the royal mews. Jonathan paused by the stables, resting a hand on the flank of a black stallion named Valor. It had once carried Elizabeth at parades. The animal turned its head, as if remembering her too. He whispered to it, They'll not have us bow to vanity, old friend. Not while I breathe. At that very hour, across the castle, Princess Catherin was still awake in her office, reading reports from the royal charities. When word of Thompson's refusal reached her, she only closed her eyes briefly and whispered, He's done what she would have wanted. Because in truth, Jonathan Thompson was no longer merely a guard. He was a living line between two eras, the last echo of a monarch whose dignity had been discipline, whose rule had been duty. The next morning, the official statement went out. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson is temporarily relieved of ceremonial duties pending review. But in the barracks of the household cavalry, something else happened. The men stood taller that morning. The bugles rang clearer. No one said it aloud, but they all knew. The colonel had drawn a line. Behind palace walls, Camilla's fury simmered. Her advisors urged restraint, but she saw only insubordination, a soldier defying her claim to power. He will regret this, she said, her tone ice. And yet, even as she plotted to silence him, Jonathan's name began to circulate quietly among the staff and soldiers, a whisper, a symbol. They began calling him the Queen's Shadow, because though Elizabeth was gone, her protector still walked her halls, unbending, unyielding, unafraid. And somewhere deep in Windsor, among the ancient stones that had witnessed centuries of crowns and betrayals, the spirit of the monarchy stirred once more. The Queen's Guard had spoken, and history, once again, was listening. By dawn, the corridors of Windsor had changed. The portraits of Elizabeth that once greeted every guard were replaced by Camilla's newly commissioned oil likeness, bright colors, heavy jewels, her expression composed and distant. To the untrained eye, it was only decoration. To Jonathan Thompson, it was a declaration of war. Within 48 hours of his refusal, Camilla acted. A royal decree, drafted by her private secretary, sealed with the crest, was delivered to the barracks of the household cavalry. It reorganized ceremonial command, removed senior officers loyal to Elizabeth's era, and reassigned them to advisory duties. On paper, it was modernization. In truth, it was purge. When Jonathan arrived, the men fell silent. Some saluted, others only met his gaze, a silent acknowledgement that they understood what was happening. The cavalry had served the crown through fire, famine, and abdication, but never had they been ordered to bend for vanity. Now they stood at the edge of that precipice. Camilla's first move was small but sharp. She ordered a change to the trooping the color formation. The Queen Consort would now receive the salute ahead of the Princess of Wales. The detail seemed minor, but in military terms it was a blow to protocol, a symbolic demotion of Catherin, and an open challenge to Elizabeth's legacy. Jonathan read the memo twice, his pulse steady but his jaw locked. Then he folded it neatly and walked straight to Buckingham's internal office. "Your Majesty," he began when granted an audience. "This adjustment is unconstitutional within royal ceremonial law. The Princess of Wales is the sovereign's direct successor's consort. The cavalry salute must follow the order of inheritance, not preference." Camilla didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Lieutenant Colonel," she said, her tone smooth, almost gentle. "I am the Queen. You will salute whom I choose." Jonathan's reply was quiet, unshakable. "The cavalry salutes the crown, ma'am, not crowns of convenience." The silence that followed was suffocating. "You presume to lecture me on my place?" Camilla's smile fractured. "You think your little parade belongs to you? Those men are mine now." "They are the crown's," Jonathan said. "And the crown, if I may remind, Your Majesty was built by the one whose picture you just removed." That night, an anonymous leak reached the press. Tensions between the Queen Consort and senior royal aide Jonathan Thompson over ceremonial protocol. The palace denied it, of course. But within hours, the story trended across the Commonwealth. Commentators called it the Windsor Divide. Inside the barracks, officers gathered in quiet defiance. They trained harder, sharper, riding through the rain as if in tribute. Someone placed a small portrait of Elizabeth back on the wall of the stables. No name, no frame, just the image of her in uniform, smiling. Beneath it, a simple inscription, "Still watching." Camilla's retaliation came swift. Jonathan was summoned again not to a hearing, but to a meeting of reconciliation. When he entered the Grand Hall, he found her already seated, flanked by advisors and 2 photographers. "Ah," she said, her smile stretched thin, "we are to demonstrate unity. For the record, you will reaffirm your loyalty publicly, before the press." Jonathan understood at once. She wanted a photograph, a kneeling officer, a humbled servant. He stood perfectly straight. "My loyalty is already public, Your Majesty," he said. "It was witnessed at every parade under Her late Majesty's reign, and it has never faltered." "Then kneel," Camilla said softly, "and prove it again." He did not move. The camera shutters began to click in the tense silence. Aides shifted uncomfortably. "I kneel only to the sovereign," Jonathan said, voice low, "and there is only one queen whose oath I swore." The next day, his office was cleared. His rank was not revoked. Camilla dared not provoke open outrage, but he was reassigned to consulting duties away from the public eye. To most, it looked like a quiet demotion. To those who understood, it was exile in uniform. But exile can forge something stronger than obedience. That evening, as he left the palace grounds, he found a small envelope slipped under the door of his car. The handwriting was elegant, steady. Inside, a single line. "Stand firm, Jonathan. The monarchy remembers its true guardians. Catherin, Princess of Wales." He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the words. Not pity, recognition. In the days that followed, whispers grew among the ranks. Soldiers began polishing their boots with extra care, their salutes sharper than before. Some called it superstition, others called it faith. But all knew that the cavalry's soul was waking again. Camilla's anger, however, burned hotter with each rumor. "He defies me in silence," she hissed to her aides. "If he will not bow, I will erase his command." She had underestimated one thing. Loyalty cannot be ordered, and respect cannot be decreed. Jonathan Thompson might have lost his post, but not his purpose. The cavalry still looked to him. Catherin still trusted him. And the people, though they did not yet know, it were beginning to choose their own queen in their hearts. In the dark of Windsor's courtyard, where moonlight kissed the banners of 1,000 years, the colonel looked up at the flag and whispered to himself, "For her, for honor, for the men who ride true." The wind stirred. Somewhere beyond the walls, a horse neighed softly, as if answering an oath that never truly ended. Because while Camilla ruled by paper and press, Jonathan Thompson ruled by memory. And memory, once awakened, has the power to outlive any crown. Rain swept across the parade grounds of London, as if the heavens themselves were mourning discipline's decay. Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Thompson stood at the edge of Hyde Park Barracks, his uniform immaculate despite the mud, watching the younger guards march under the command of a new officer, one appointed not for valor, but for compliance. Captain Alder, a man whose loyalty bent wherever authority leaned, barked the drills without conviction. His sword gleamed, his eyes hollow. The cavalry's rhythm was perfect, yet lifeless precision without pride. Jonathan could feel the difference in the sound of their boots. It was the sound of obedience, not devotion. Camilla's reshuffling had worked on paper. The hierarchy was intact. The salutes were polished. The monarchy looked composed again. But the men's eyes told another story. They looked at Thompson when they thought no one watched. They looked to him for the invisible command, the moral compass the new regime could not manufacture. And so began what the palace would later call the silent resistance. It started with small gestures, a guardsman polishing his boots until they reflected Elizabeth's portrait in the glass. A folded note left at Thompson's quarters bearing only 2 words, "Still loyal." The bugler, during morning drill, deliberately playing the older ceremonial march Elizabeth's tune, long retired since Camilla's ascension. It was never spoken of, but it was felt. The spirit of the old queen had returned through discipline and defiance intertwined. One evening, Catherin requested Jonathan's presence at Kensington under the guise of a private consultation. He arrived in civilian attire, escorted discreetly through a side entrance. The princess was waiting in her study, a single candle flickering beside the sapphire brooch once worn by Elizabeth herself. "I should not have summoned you," she said softly, "but I had to thank you for holding the line." "Although," Jonathan bowed, "Your Royal Highness, I only did what my oath demands." Catherine's gaze lingered on the window, where rain traced silver veins down the glass. "They are testing the limits of loyalty, Colonel. They want soldiers who salute the person, not the principle. You and I both know where that leads." He nodded. "To tyranny and silk." Her faint smile didn't reach her eyes. "They will come for you again, Jonathan. You know that, don't you?" "I do," he said simply, "and I'm ready." For a moment, silence held them 2 people, bound not by rank, but by remembrance. Then Catherin spoke, her voice low but steady. "My grandmother-in-law believed that institutions survive because some people refuse to forget who they serve. You remind them of that. If they silence you, they silence her." She reached into a small wooden box and handed him a folded document, the original Oath of Household Service, written in Elizabeth's hand. Jonathan recognized the script immediately. "Serve the crown in truth. Obey where duty commands. Resist where conscience must." He read it twice before meeting Catherine's gaze. "Then my orders remain unchanged." Word of his visit spread quietly. Within days, the cavalry barracks felt different. There was a spark in the men again, an invisible alignment that Camilla's decrees could not erase. They called it the return of the shadow, because whenever Thompson passed through the yard, the air itself seemed to straighten. But Camilla noticed too. Her aides reported murmurs of unrest, of old loyalties resurrecting. In her mind, Jonathan was no longer just a stubborn officer, he was a contagion. She called a meeting of the royal household to tighten control. "This man is undermining me," she said coldly. "He's turning sentiment into sedition." An advisor hesitated. "Ma'am, the public loves him. He's the face of continuity, the soldier who served both Elizabeth and Charles. Removing him outright could..." "Could what?" she snapped. "Make me look insecure? I am the queen." Yet beneath the bravado, she sensed the tide turning. Every time Catherin appeared in public, she drew reverence that Camilla's presence never commanded. Crowds chanted her name softly, respectfully, as if invoking something sacred. That same reverence now cloaked Jonathan. His refusal had become legend, retold by soldiers, by citizens, even whispered among royal staff. It wasn't rebellion, it was righteousness. Then came the order. A formal letter from the office of the Queen Consort, delivered by a trembling courier. Jonathan unfolded it beneath the flickering barracks lamp. "You are hereby instructed to attend the upcoming royal review under the supervision of Captain Alder. You will not lead, you will observe. All ceremonial commands shall be executed per the Queen Consort's directives. Deviation will be considered insubordination." He stared at the words for a long moment. Then, with a quiet exhale, He reached for a pen and wrote his reply in perfect handwriting. Respectfully declined. The honor of the cavalry cannot be delegated to vanity. Our service is to the crown, not its shadow. He sealed it with wax and sent it back. By morning, the news had leaked again, perhaps by fate, perhaps by loyal hands. The public headline read, "Royal officer refuses to bow to palace politics." Camilla was livid. "He defies me with poetry now," she shouted, slamming her glass onto the table. But Jonathan was beyond her reach. Each attack only purified his purpose. He had become what Elizabeth once called a silent guardian of meaning. On the day of the review, thousands gathered outside the gates. Catherin appeared beside William, calm and radiant. Camilla watched from the balcony, her expression strained. When the bugles sounded, the cavalry rode forth, not in the order decreed by Camilla's office, but in the traditional alignment of the late Queen's code. The crowd erupted in applause before anyone could intervene. At the lead rode Jonathan, reinstated by the people's will if not by the palace's. He saluted Catherin first, then the flag. Camilla turned pale. "Who authorized this?" she hissed. No one answered, because authority can command obedience, but only honor commands the heart. That afternoon, newspapers across the world carried the same headline, "The Queen's shadow rides again." And though Camilla fumed in silence, the people already knew what history would one day write. That when vanity tried to rewrite the code, a soldier reminded the kingdom what loyalty truly meant. The rain had stopped, but the air around Buckingham Palace still felt heavy, thick with expectation. The Queen Consort was done tolerating defiance. Camilla's advisors had warned her that outright dismissal of Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Thompson would cause an uproar, so she chose a subtler weapon: humiliation. A letter arrived for Jonathan, signed in Camilla's immaculate hand. He was to appear before the Royal Council for a formal clarification of ceremonial conduct. No accusations, no trial, just clarification. He understood immediately. It was a trap. The meeting was staged inside the Green Drawing Room, the same chamber where Elizabeth once held her private audiences. Now, portraits of Camilla's lineage lined the walls, newly framed and glaringly out of place. The scent of polish and roses couldn't hide the chill that clung to the room. When Jonathan entered, Camilla was already seated at the head of the table, her pearls gleaming like frost. Around her sat advisors, aides, and 2 members of the press invited under the guise of historical documentation. Every move was designed for optics, not justice. "Lieutenant Colonel," she began, her tone silken but sharp, "we are here to resolve a misunderstanding. It appears you've taken certain liberties with protocol." Jonathan stood at attention. "Your Majesty, if protocol has been violated, I will correct it if proven that the correction honors the crown and not convenience." "I?" Camilla smiled thinly. "Always the poet. Tell me then, Colonel, when you saluted the Princess of Wales before me during the royal review, was that convenience or rebellion?" "It was tradition," Jonathan replied. "Established by Her late Majesty, preserved through duty. The crown has a hierarchy, not a hierarchy of vanity." Gasps rippled around the table. One aide dropped his pen. Camilla's fingers tightened on her glass. "You forget yourself. I am the Queen Consort, the living symbol of unity." "With respect," Jonathan said, eyes unwavering. "Unity is not demanded, it's earned." The words cut through the air like sabers. One of the reporters scribbled frantically. The trap had failed. He wasn't giving her contrition. He was giving her clarity. Camilla leaned forward. "Do you know what loyalty means, Colonel?" He paused before answering. "Yes, ma'am. It means standing firm even when silence would be safer." "Aye." That night, the palace released a statement to the press. An internal disciplinary review has been conducted regarding ceremonial miscommunication between the Royal Guard and the Queen Consort's office. Both parties have reaffirmed their commitment to unity. But no one believed it. The footage leaked. One of Camilla's aides had recorded the exchange, intending to catch Jonathan's submission. Instead, the world saw a soldier refusing to bow. The video spread like wildfire. Social media called him the last knight. Newspapers ran headlines. "Guard defends Queen Elizabeth's code, public cheers the old loyalty." Across the Commonwealth, something stirred. Veterans sent letters to his barracks. Children wrote messages signed, "For the Queen's shadow." Camilla, furious, ordered a full investigation. "Find who leaked it. I want his face gone from every platform." But her press chief, pale and exhausted, could only whisper, "It's too late, ma'am. They've made him a symbol. You can't erase symbols." In private, Catherin summoned Jonathan once more. He entered quietly, his uniform newly pressed, his expression unchanged. "You've become a storm, Colonel," she said softly. "And storms frighten fragile crowns." He bowed slightly. I didn't seek fame, Your Royal Highness. Only truth. I know, she said. That's why they fear you. She walked to the window, her reflection merging with the falling dusk. They'll call for your resignation soon. If you stand your ground, they'll label it mutiny. If you yield, they'll call it guilt. Jonathan smiled faintly. Then I'll let them choose their poison. Catherin turned to him, eyes steady. What will you do if they strip you of your post? He didn't hesitate. Continue serving the monarchy as she taught me. Service doesn't require a title. For the first time, she let her composure slip, just a little. You remind me of her, of the strength she carried in silence. Jonathan lowered his gaze. The Queen once said to me, there will come a time when the uniform becomes the message. Wear it well. I intend to. 2 days later, an emergency bulletin hit every major outlet. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson temporarily suspended pending formal inquiry. Camilla had struck her blow, but in doing so, she had revealed something deeper, that her power relied on paperwork, while his relied on respect. Outside the palace, hundreds gathered in quiet vigil. Former soldiers stood side by side with civilians, holding candles and small flags. They weren't protesting, they were remembering. An old guardsman murmured to a reporter, "That man stood for the Queen when everyone else bowed to politics. That's not defiance, that's duty." Catherin watched the vigil from a palace window that night, the flickering light painting her face in gold and shadow. She whispered a single line to herself. They've suspended him from service, but they've promoted him in history. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, Jonathan knelt beside his horse in the rain, whispering his vow anew. For Her Majesty, whose word was honor, for the princess, whose heart is worthy, for the guard, whose steel remembers. The storm had passed, but the air was different now. The crown had two centers, one gilded by power, and one forged by loyalty. And though Camilla wore the jewels, it was Jonathan Thompson who carried the shine of truth. The weeks that followed were filled with tension so sharp it could slice through the marble silence of Buckingham. Camilla's revenge had begun, no longer confined to Jonathan Thompson. This time, her target was the entire royal cavalry. She called it the reform of ceremony, a seemingly noble initiative to modernize royal tradition. But those who served knew the truth. It was a campaign to bend the guard to her will, to erase the last traces of Elizabeth's discipline. New uniforms were commissioned, flashy, gilded, impractical. The classic black and scarlet tunics, worn by guards since the reign of Queen Victoria, were to be retired. She claimed the changes represented a modern monarchy. To Jonathan, it was desecration. He watched from afar, now a suspended officer, as the barracks received orders to replace the regimental crest Elizabeth cipher with Camilla's initials. The men were furious, though none dared to speak. Until one morning, an anonymous letter appeared pinned to the main notice board. Our loyalty was sworn to the crown, not to comfort. We are the guard, not the court. The shadow of Windsor. Everyone knew who had written it. Camilla was livid. He mocks me from exile, she hissed during her briefing. This ends now. She ordered disciplinary action against 3 officers suspected of leaking correspondence to the press. 2 were stripped of parade duties. 1 was transferred out of London. But the effect was the opposite of what she wanted. The barracks grew quieter, harder, more united. When Jonathan heard of the punishments, he returned not in uniform, but in spirit. He met his former comrades in a rain-soaked pub off Horse Guards Road. The fire burned low as he spoke. I can't tell you what to do, he said, but I can remind you what we are. We don't protect crowns. We protect what crowns stand for. The men nodded in silence. Some wept quietly into their pints. They all knew what was coming. Days later, Catherin received an urgent message. The Queen Consort planned to make a surprise inspection of the cavalry at dawn, televised live, cameras ready to demonstrate loyalty and unity. But the guards had already decided they would not perform her new formation. The morning broke cold and gray. Camilla arrived in pearls and fur, a practiced smile on her lips, flanked by handlers and photographers. "Where is the commanding officer?" she demanded. From the stables, the men emerged in full uniform, the old one, the red and black that had outlasted kings and wars. At their front stood Jonathan. He was not supposed to be there. He was not allowed, but there he was, helmet gleaming, sword drawn in salute. The cameras captured everything. Camilla's expression froze. "This is insubordination," she whispered. Jonathan's voice carried across the courtyard like thunder. "No, ma'am, this is remembrance." He signaled the men. The band began to play God Save the Queen, the original arrangement. The sound rolled through the air, echoing through the stone corridors of the palace itself. Catherin, watching from a distance, felt tears prick her eyes. The nation watched live as the royal guard reclaimed its soul. Camilla turned and left before the anthem ended, but the damage was done. By midday, the footage had gone viral across the Commonwealth. The people called it the Morning of Honor. That evening, King Charles summoned Jonathan to the palace. The king's face was pale, torn between love, duty, and politics. "You've humiliated her," Charles said quietly, and yet he paused, eyes heavy with memory. "My mother would have been proud." Jonathan bowed deeply. "I did only what she would have commanded, sir." Charles exhaled. "You've left me no choice. You are to resign your commission effective immediately." Jonathan nodded. "Then I shall serve without one." He left Buckingham that night a free man, stripped of rank but crowned in respect. Soldiers saluted him in the street. Citizens whispered his name as if it were legend. The cavalry stood taller the next day, their hearts unbroken. Camilla had won the papers, but Jonathan had won history. And in the quiet of Kensington Palace, Catherin placed a single note beside the sapphire brooch once gifted by the late Queen. For courage that cannot be commanded. Because the monarchy, she knew, would survive not through crowns but through men like Jonathan Thompson, whose honor burned brighter than any jewel. Spring returned to Windsor, like a slow forgiveness. The air smelled of new rain, lilacs, and something else, hope reborn. The kingdom had endured months of whispers, headlines, and palace politics. But beneath it all, a single truth had settled into the nation's heart. Honor cannot be dismissed. Jonathan Thompson lived quietly now, far from the gilded corridors. He tended horses at a modest royal stable in the countryside. No titles, no guards, no cameras. Yet every morning, when the bugle sounded in London, he would pause and listen, because he knew that somewhere, the men still rode with his creed in their hearts. Catherin had not forgotten him. In the spring of that year, a grand event was announced. The commemoration of Queen Elizabeth II's legacy, held at St. George's Chapel. It was not a coronation, but something deeper, a symbolic renewal of the crown's moral compass. Catherin, radiant in pale blue, would preside alongside the king. Camilla's name appeared in the program, but she declined attendance, citing illness. Few believed it. When Jonathan received the invitation, he almost refused. But the letter bore a seal he recognized Elizabeth's old insignia, now reintroduced for this single occasion. And beneath it, a handwritten note from Catherin. "The guard still stands. Come home, Colonel." He arrived quietly, in the uniform he was told never to wear again. As he entered the chapel, hundreds of heads turned. The orchestra fell silent. Soldiers, veterans, and nobles alike rose to their feet not in ceremony, but in reverence. Catherin stepped forward to meet him at the altar. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, smiling. "Neither should honor," he replied. Yet it found its way back. The service began. It was simple, solemn, beautiful. When Catherin rose to speak, her voice carried through the vaulted chamber with quiet conviction. A monarchy is not measured by crowns, but by conscience. It stands not because of power, but because of those who guard its soul. Today, we honor one who never abandoned his oath not to a person, but to a principle. She turned, extending her hand. Jonathan stepped forward, eyes lowered. The crowd held its breath as she pinned upon his chest the sapphire star of Elizabeth, a new honor created in the late Queen's name. "For loyalty beyond command," she declared. Applause filled the chapel like thunder. Some said even the marble statues seemed to breathe again. Outside, as the procession ended, Jonathan saluted one final time, not to a monarch, but to a memory. The Union Jack fluttered above the towers, bathed in morning light. Catherin stood at the steps, watching him go. In her eyes shone gratitude and sorrow, because she knew heroes like him didn't belong to palaces, they belonged to history. Before leaving, Jonathan paused, turned, and offered the final words he would ever speak to the royal family. "Tell the men to keep their swords clean. The day they dull, the kingdom forgets why it stands." Then he walked into the sunlight, disappearing into legend. Years later, when tourists visited Windsor, guides would point to a bronze statue near the barracks. A soldier standing tall, head bowed slightly, saber in hand. The inscription beneath read, "Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Thompson, the last knight of the Queen." He saluted no title. He served no vanity. He guarded the meaning of the crown. And in every ceremony since, before the parade began, the cavalry's commander would whisper the same three words into the wind, words that once saved a monarchy from forgetting itself. "For the Queen."